we have now our character controller set up, and it is time to actually add some action while our little guy is idling, walking, or jumping. For that, we're going to jump back to Blender, and we are having three different animation that can be connected to our little character. We got the jump, we have seen that earlier, the jump, the walk, and the idle animation. We're going to start by exporting the jump animation. So the first step when you are exporting an action animation is to ensure that the amount of frame that you're exporting out are basically the number that you need. So under the output properties scene, we are going to specify that the first frame is 0 and the last frame that we're importing, in this case for the jump animation, is 7. So we need to specify that we're only and simply going to export this frame range. Instead, you're going to end up having too many frames or not enough frame. So we're going to first export the jump, and we're going to select our skeleton, our armature as it's called in Blender, file export Collada, and overwrite our MicroLand with the selection only. We are going to go back inside the energy editor, and under library, with the library tab selected, we are going to ensure that our character is actually selected. So like that, we're going to append action to that specific object. I'm going to click shift with the viewport selected. I'm going to click shift and 2 tab to enter wireframe, and I'm going to ensure that my little guy here is selected. Now, under library, it doesn't really matter the directory that you're located. We're simply going to append action to this object here. So asset, import, my Collada file. I will not import any geometries. I will not import any materials. I will only focus on the animation. So I will import the animation library, and I'm going to ensure that the action that will be imported are actually going to be appended to my character object. For skeletons, I don't need. I already have the skeleton that is attached to my skeletal mesh. And for visual scenes, I'm simply going to turn everything off. So only focusing on the animations itself. I am going to import that. And if we jump to our timeline here, we can see that now our character have a first action that is connected. And the action will be the jump animation. I'm going to rename it to jump and click the build button to basically convert those scripting command into real memory address, which will in turn speed up our action playback drastically. So I got my first animation, my first action. I will jump back into Blender, repeat the process for my second one that I have, which is walk, which start at 0 and end at frame 21. So I'm going to specify that the frame start is 0, the frame end is going to be 21. File, export Collada, override my MicroLand file with selection only. Back to my energy editor, library, asset, import, MicroLand, open, same thing, disable geometries, disable materials, only focus on animation and ensure that character is selected, my little guy, skeleton off, and visual scenes, turn everything off. I am going to import, and now in timeline, I can see that I have two actions connected to my character. This action is walk, so I'm going to call it walk, and I'm going to click here to build that action. Last one is going to be idle. Idle start at frame 0 and goes all the way to frame 176. So from 0 to 176. File, export Collada, MicroLand, selection only, export, back to the energy editor, library, asset, import, my Collada file, open that up, no geometries, no materials, no skeletons, nothing in visual scene, only focus on animation and append to object character, import. Now under timeline, I got jump, walk, and the last one is going to be idle. I'm going to build. Now, we have dot to put the focus. on our character. Now, basically all these animation by default, if I click an example, I increase the application time, and I'm going to select idle in example, and I'm going to push spacebar to change the state to play while it's slightly inverted here. So let's go back into our character here, character controller in the under coding, and we are going to set that the rotation is going to be 90. We could have done that in Blender. So like that, my little guy is looking straight up here and he's running the idle animation. You can notice that this animation is just turning over, is looping over and over and over. That's exactly what we want for idle. And this is the same that we want for walk. We want the walk action to turn and loop over and over. But when it comes to jump, all we want is, if I run jump right now, it's just going to jump over and over and over and repeat that. I don't want that for jump. For jump, I simply want my action to be played once, and then once I reach the last frame, just hold that frame until I get back to the ground. So what I'm going to do is, with jump selected, I'm going to go on my curve area and push Ctrl A to select all channels. And I'm going to go under selection, cycle mode, and I'm going to see that this one is hold, and while the other two are set to loop. So what is going to happen if I stop this, change the state, and simply drag using Alt? I am simply going to, as soon as I reach the last frame, I'm simply going to hold it and hold it. So from 0 to my last frame, and then hold it until I get back to the ground, or I get back idling and walking. So basically now I have all my actions that are set up. Let's put them all to stop. And now we are going to we're going to add a controller to be able to change the state of these actions. So we have now our jump, walk, and idle action. Let's create an action controller to actually control the state of these actions. So for that, we're going to add to the default layout here, and under MicroLand and scripts, we are going to go under asset and new controller. We're going to call this a new controller, character controller, create. And with our little guy selected, we're going to go under properties and object and add a new action controller slot. We're going to drag and drop our new controller right here. And we're going to jump over the animation layout to start editing our asset. So we are in the controller editor, and we're going to select our character controller. We're going to start off by adding a new layer. The action layers are basically to separate the kind of action clip that you're going to deal with. You can have one layer for the upper body, another layer for the lower body, the left arm, right arm, you choose. In this case, we are going to basically have only one that is going to control our entire character, but you can add more if you require more complexity, more active layers will be set up here, but we're going to keep things simple here. So we're going to have a single action layer. So next is we're going to add an entry state. So add a new clip, and it's going to be a single one, which by default will be our entry state. And as the action, we want to be idling. So every time we enter to evaluate our controller, the first entry state will be idling. Next, we want to move from idle to walk. So we're going to add a new single action clip. And this time the motion, under motions, we are going to select that the action will be walk. So with that in place, we need to create transition that is going to go from our default entry state to walk, and from walk back to idle if we stop having any sort of motion. So what we're going to do, we are going to need to have one more state that happen regardless if we are idling or regardless if we are walking. We want this state to be the jump state. So what we're going to do, we're going to add a new any state to indicate that at any time, either we are in idle or either we are walking, we can enter this state here. And from this state, we want to connect it to the jump. So here I'm going to create a new single action clip. And for this, I am going to set that it is jump. So I'm going to need to create another transition that is going to go from any state to jump and jump back to any state that is then going to jump to any previous state that we were either walking or either idling. So I'm going to need to create a few variables to be able to drive these states. So I'm going to go under the variable tab, and I'm going to add two variables. The first one, I'm going to add a Boolean that I'm going to call motion. So confirm. And either I'm in motion, either I am moving, true or false. And the second one that we're having is basically going to be our jump. Are we in jump motion or not? Are we on the ground or are we in between the ground and the air? So we're going to add a new variable of the type Boolean as well. And we're going to call it, if I click here for editing, I'm going to call it jump. Now that I have my two variables, I need to start creating transition from this state to that state, this state back to my entry state, and the same for my any state. So I'm going to select my entry state. Holding shift, I am going to select my walk, and I'm going to push spacebar to create a transition from entry state to walk. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to add a condition. So I am going to click the plus button to add a condition. So basically what I'm looking for is if it's 0, I am idling, and if it's 1, I am walking. So variable is going to be motion. Let's give a bit of more space here. Select my transition again. Here, if the variable is motion and is greater than false or different than false, not equal to false, then I am going to walk. And then from walk, back to my entry state, selecting the walk and hold shift entry state, push spacebar. I am going to now edit this transition, add a condition, motion equal to 0 or true or false. I am going to now be able to handle this condition. So if I click on my transition here, if my motion is not equal to false or 0, I am going to walk, and from walk, if my condition, my motion is equal to false, then I'm going to go back to idle. Now, let's put that in code, and after that, we're going to handle the jump button. To add the new variables that have been created for this controller, if I go under properties and object with my character selected, I am simply going to click here to refresh those variables. And now, if I go down to my member variable here, I am going to be able to have access to them. And these are the one that I'm going to use also in code. But first of all, I am simply going to test this first condition here. So I'm going to push the play. Oh, and I can see that my little guy here is 90 degrees down. I'm going to go fix that. So I'm going to go under coding, and I am going to here, when I assign the basis matrix, I could have fixed that in Blender in the animation. Let's just do it in code here. So set 90 degrees on the X. I'm going to push build. So my little guy is straight up now. If I go back to my animation layout. So basically we are, as you can see, we are in this state here. We are basically at our motion is equal to false. Now let's toggle this to true and see what is going to happen. We have now our little guy that start moving as soon as the idle animation is done. This is not entirely what we want. So what we want is to change directly at any time. So we're going to click here to enable immediate transition. So as soon as I'm going to push my motion to be true, I am going to start walking. I can see that the transition is a bit slow. So I'm going to go under duration, and I'm going to put that to 0.2, about half. If I click true, false, true, false, it's about right. So what I'm going to do now, I want the same to happen also for the walk. So I'm going to click on my transition here, and I'm going to click to have a immediate transition. And I'm going to set that also. Let's say that I put 0.25, half of it. I'm going to change that one also just to have something that is half the default value. So if my motion is false, now I push true, I jump to the walk here. And if it goes back to false, I go back to my idle. Now I'm going to set up the same kind of relationship with my jump. I'm going to stop that here. So any state here, holding shift to jump, create my transition, and now select jump first, hold shift, any state, push space bar. So now I got two direction. I'm going to select my first one here, that is from any state to jump. I'm going to also want to toggle a immediate transition that I'm going to put at 0.25 as well. And now this time for the condition is if my jump is equal to 1 or true is the same thing. And for the second one, I am going to set that if my, add an expression, if my jump is equal to 0, I am going to go back to any state. And I want to have a immediate transition. I'm going to put 0.25 here as well, just to be consistent, 0.25, 0.25. And now we are having, if jump is equal to true, I'm going to jump. And if jump is equal to false, I return back to any state. So I'm going to increase my application time. I'm entering idle. And if I click here on jump true, he's going to start jumping and he's looping on jump. And when it turns back to false, it goes back to idling because I was currently idling. So now that we have all that set in place, what we're going to, and we see that our action controller is actually responding the way we want it to respond. It is now time to transfer what I'm doing here manually in code. So we're going to go under coding and we're going to pull our character controller and we are going to start to add new code. We're going to first start with our jump, which we are going to add code into ground check. So basically here, if we are not on the ground, if we are on the ground here, we want to make sure that our jump is to false. And the opposite, if we are returning ground check false, it means that we're in the air. So we are going to want to set that variable to true. And as we have converted those action controller variable into member variable for the object, we all and simply have to say that our character variable, our object variable here, get variable jump, and it is the type Boolean. So we are going to set it to false. And same here, the character, the object, get the variable jump, Boolean, set it to true. So basically that should do it for our jump. Now we are going to handle our motion. So when we are actually in motion, we need to make sure this is the place that we're in motion when we're actually changing the actual direction. But there's one more thing that we need to check. We need to check if we are on the ground. So if we are on the ground, we are going to get the variable motion and we're going to set it to false, to true, because we are actually moving. If we are in the air, we are going to ensure that our ground is now false. So if we are actually having a motion and we are on the ground, our motion will be set to true. We are going to start walking. If we are on ground and we are not having any motion, we want the motion to be false, which means that we're going to return back to our idle state. I'm going to build that and I'm going to play. And I'm going to pick up my game controller and I'm going to start moving around. And as you can see, my little guy is now walking when I'm pushing the direction. If I'm jumping, he's entering the jump state. As soon as he's in the air, if I jump from here and as soon as I touch the ground. So as long as I'm in the air, he's going to run the jump animation. If I do not touch my left analog stick, he's going to enter the idle mode. And if I touch my analog stick, I move my analog stick around, he's automatically going to run the walk animation. And this is basically how you're using a action controller.